It's been 3 years since the inception of the 8th Nigerian Senate, and it seems quite a good time as ever to look back at the events and achievements of this premier legislative house. It has been argued and opined that the 8th Senate is the most productive Nigeria has witnessed since the new dawn of democracy in 1999. The most prominent statistics showcasing the productive nature of the Senate is the record-breaking 229 bills passed in a 4-year term and 138 petitions cleared. The closest record to this would be the 5th Senate of 2003 to 2007, which had previously passed the most bills of 129 bills in a 4-year term. The present Senate is, however, the most consequential in our political history. This is with regards to the type of legislation it has passed and their historic implications. The 8th Nigerian Senate started on a rough note with the controversy surrounding the inauguration of Dr. Abubakar Bukola Saraki becoming its president on the 9th of June 2015. Needing only 38 senators to form a quorum, he was elected unopposed with 57 senators present and 51 senators absent. The controversial absence of the 51 senators and the fact that the favored senator by the presidency for the role of Senate President had failed to get the job led to heated, politically instigated, and often malicious media attacks. These attacks on the leadership of the Senate and its vocal members, rather than destabilize the Senate, became the glue that united the senators, and from it they developed a patriotic sense of duty and loyalty towards the Federal Republic of Nigeria and not the ruling political party. Despite the media controversies and raging party politics, the 8th Senate's leaderships worked together in the most bipartisan effort till date on landmark legislations that are instrumental to Nigeria's development. They pushed their own agenda not on the usual rhetoric of providing a better life for all, but on reviving the economy and creating opportunities in governance, healthcare, business, oil and gas, entrepreneurship, youth development, and social welfare. Their focus was driven by an urgent need to curb the impact of a double-digit recession that had thrown the economy into a free-for-all from the sharp drop in the price of oil in the international market. Our over-reliance on oil exports for revenue plummeted our reserves, cost us 4 million jobs, and nearly decimated the local currency. The country had to change its strategy for development and growth, and do it fast. The National Assembly, being the highest representation of the people at the federal level, swung into action and began an impressive set of legislative interventions to stem the negative tide. With a focus on diversification and to eradicate wastage, the National Assembly has spent the last 3 years passing key legislation to anchor the necessary policies and laws to catalyze critical sectors of the economy, as well as reforms to leverage on private sector growth and free market, taxation reforms, national cohesion, and social inclusion, tackling the economy through legislature. For the first time in the history of the Nigerian legislature, the business community was invited for a strategic summit to figure out and eradicate the barriers to the private sector occupying their role in the country's development and providing the much-needed job. From the National Assembly Business Roundtable, NASSBER, came a concise list of laws in need of immediate reform, including the Companies and Allied Matters Act, which changed the playing field by reducing the barrier of entry for new businesses and entrepreneurs. It also reduced the operational regulations for small businesses so they can compete better. The Nigerian Procurement Bill, Amendment 2015, compels the Nigerian government and its agencies to patronize made-in-Nigeria goods and services before any other, with government being the largest purchaser of goods, costing in trillions of naira, all of which is paid to foreign businesses or financing importation of goods. Channeling the same funds to our local businesses would immediately create opportunities and jobs as local manufacturers rise to meet the demands. The bill has already had impact on the Nigerian army, which now orders all its boots and supportive gear from manufacturers in Aba, Abia State. The PIGB is probably the 8th Senate's biggest legislative feat, breaking a 17-year jinx that stalled the most important piece of legislation for the Nigerian oil industry. With petroleum contributing more than 70% of government's revenue and 90% of foreign exchange earnings, as well as external reserves, the sector has suffered from uncertainty of regulations, mismanagement, and gross scandals. After 2 decades of failed attempts to reform the petroleum sector, the 8th Senate took the bull by its horns to pass the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, PIGB, which harmonized the governance framework of oil industry. The rise of fintech came along with rising fraudulent online activities. The passage of the Electronic Transaction Bill in 2015 became the first ever legal framework that provided legal foundation for conducting transactions using electronic or related media. The importance of this bill cannot be overemphasized. With countries like Kenya and South Africa leading in the fintech space, Nigeria, with a large market and resourceful and talented youth, needed to have a legal framework to operate in the e-commerce market. With a private sector law reform underway, the Senate then moved to pass what would be known as the Infrastructure Bill to allow their participation in sectors that previously was solely the responsibility of the government, and a responsibility that it was struggling to uphold and in most cases had failed woefully. With projects like the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway having been under construction for almost 2 decades and gulping up to 5 billion naira yearly of resources that could be assigned to social projects like health and education, and an estimated investment recoup time of less than 10 years, the Senate opted to think strategically on the best use of resources. Where there is change, there will be resistance. One of the major differentiating factors for the 8th Senate is their approach to the oversight role they play, the principle of checks and balances which help in checking excesses in government. At the twilight of 2017, the Red Chamber investigated the 2015 Kaduna Power Plant, which it declared must be saved from becoming a white elephant project. That hearing exposed some dubious dealings in the Ministry of Power and attempts to lure the country into paying over 147 million naira per day for diesel to power only 1 of 8 units, while abandoning gas, which the plant was designed for. The investigation has become one of the most revealing in the history of the Nigerian Senate. In its early years, the 8th Senate has also investigated the operations of the Treasury Single Account, TSA, which it claimed was about to cost the country some 25 billion naira in 2016. The investigations ensured the review of some operations of the TSA, especially as it relates to commission to stakeholders. The Senate Probe Committee uncovered the grass-cutting scandal involving the former Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Babachir Lawal, for misappropriating funds of over 200 million naira. A major advantage in the fight against corruption was provided by the 8th Senate with the passage of the Whistleblower Protection Bill. This yielded over billions in stolen funds recovered by the government. Being the youngest arm of the country's democratic government, its role and activities are always misunderstood. When the Senate asserts itself, it is often accused by the executive as being antagonistic towards good governance, when in actual fact, this has been the most collaborative and participatory of legislatures thus far. The first real test of the 8th Senate came in the form of presidential ministerial nominee confirmations. A lot of people expected a revenge from the Senate in terms of turning down some ministers based on the role they played or play in the attack on the Senate. However, what we witnessed was a transparent session where senators asked relevant questions and, in the absence of designated ministries, relied on the CVs of the nominated ministers to engage them. The 8th Senate pioneered the first ever National Assembly joint public hearing on budget. A 3-day public hearing was opened to the members of the public, CSOs, and labor organizations. Other achievements are the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency Amendment Bill 2012, which focused on oil spilling in the Niger Delta. Gas Flaring Prohibition Bill 2012, which criminalized wasting gas and turning it into income generation, and the Climate Change Commission Bill 2013. The Senate has also passed a law to end the never-ending cycle of late presentation and passage of the budget. The law provides that the budget be presented and defended by the executive within a specific time frame. This is to bring to an end the constant cycle of excuses given by the executive as the reason for the poor performance of the country's budget. The 8th Senate amended the Universal Basic Education (UBEC) Act to ensure that the 2% budgetary allocation from the Consolidated Revenue Fund is increased to 3%. The new law also eased pressure on states accessing the funds for education infrastructure development by reducing the counterpart funding from 50% to 10%. The reduction to 10% provides a base for states to access critical funding needed to stimulate education as the country works towards restructuring and diversification of other revenue generation. For the first time since the passage of the NHA 2014, the 8th Senate has approved 1% of the CRF for the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund for the revitalization of primary healthcare delivery in the country. This action now provides more critical funding required for the provision of excellent health services in the country. The main responsibility of any public service institution is to be extremely responsive to the yearnings of its constituents, the Nigerian people. In March 2018, the National Assembly quickly rose to the occasion to prevent the expulsion of Nigeria from the global community of the exchange of financial intelligence by expediting the passage of the National Financial Intelligence Unit Bill, NFIU. With this bill passed, financial intelligence in Nigeria would experience a strengthened system to fight against money laundering, financial terrorism, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In response to the increased violent clashes between herdsmen and farmers in the middle belt of the country and the continued fight against terrorism, the Senate has embarked upon the reform of the Nigerian police force to improve upon better community policing and monitoring. 180 petitions have been brought before the Senate and cleared, with dozens more under active investigations and review. The 8th Senate constantly sends delegations to the site of active issues and engages directly with Nigerian people at their point of need. Most importantly, the 8th Senate recognizes our teeming youthful and enterprising population who are calling strongly for better opportunities, living conditions, and good governance by passing the Not Too Young to Run bill. The bill will facilitate greater participation of Nigerian youth in government by reducing the age barrier to elected positions. The key to changing this involves empowering young people to have a central role in affairs that largely affect them. The 8th Senate, to the admission of Nigerians, championed this and delivered a constitutional amendment which reduces the age barrier to contest for elected office. 3 years on, much accomplished, but still more to do. The dividends of the 8th Senate are slowly bearing fruits. With the actions taken to promote diversification of the economy and the barriers to entry lowered for new, more youthful players, opportunities are opening up every day in agriculture, technology, lifestyle, food processing, entertainment, and most importantly, exports. To ensure all these, the leadership of the 8th Senate and National Assembly as a whole has made personal sacrifice. Despite their challenges, they have worked collaboratively to strengthen the institution of the Senate and to also show clearly the need for the restructuring of the country and amendments of critical parts of the Constitution. The major difference between a democratic system and a dictatorship is the voice of the people eschewed in its legislation. With the 8th Senate and its dogged focus playing its role in steering the democratic affairs of Nigeria, it is clear is systematically positioning itself to reclaim its title as the giant of Africa.